Welcome, Husker fans. Thank you for tuning in to Big Red Radio, the Husker Talk Show. I am your host, Caleb Jenner. Next to me is my co-host, Zach. Zach, it was a tough week last week. Maybe another tough week coming up. But how are you doing right now?
I think last week put me a little under the weather as
Yeah.
as it looked like it did for the team. You know, um, being a diehard Husker fan is not easy, but I wouldn't trade it for the world. I think uh, I think people are acting like we're 2-5,
Right.
but we're 5-2, and so did we get beat by almost 50 points? Yeah, we did. Um, But if you listen to Matt Rule talk, he's like, yeah, I mean, when it was 28-7, 35-7, I probably could have just, made it maybe 35-14 and never had, and it never would have got that way if we just ran the ball. But he said, I can't just not try to get back in this game. So I kept throwing the ball, and maybe some plays we shouldn't have called and some situations are going for our force sometime and some situations we shouldn't have. But I'd rather lose by 50 trying to get back into it than just accept a loss in the third quarter. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of how, I look at it.
Yeah. So we've taken a little bit of time off. We had some things to take care of, with ourselves, and then we took a bye week with the bye week, and then took the Indiana week off, and now we're back with the Ohio State week. But I think this is a good time. We're not going to do a normal preview episode. We're gonna preview the Ohio State game a little bit. We already pretty much talked about the Indiana game. Not really much to take away from it. Um, I think it was sort of you know, I don't want to say Nebraska played their worst game and Indiana played their best, but I think it was kind of on that level. I think if those teams played 10 times, I think one of those games goes that way. I think a lot of the other time it's a little bit closer. Not saying Nebraska wins very many of them. Nebraska just wasn't the better team. But I don't think that score replicates exactly what the difference in team looks like. So just kind of a fluke, I want to say. Not saying Nebraska should have won that game, or it wasn't a bad showing, because it was. But I don't think Nebraska's that bad, and I don't think Indiana's that good. I do think they're a lot better than we thought they were. But so we're gonna go to the Ohio State game for a little bit, and then we're gonna shift over to the rest of the schedule, because a lot of people are talking about, you know, we always thought some games were wins, some games were losses. Those look a little bit different now. A lot of people thought Nebraska would be 7-0 going into this, 5-2, but you look at the two losses. Illinois is a top 25 team. Indiana's a top 15 team. Two teams that are looking to make the playoff. We're going to see what happens with Illinois against Oregon tomorrow. But those are two teams that are really trying to make the playoff, and obviously Nebraska didn't look good against Indiana, but had every chance to win against Illinois. So I don't think we should just throw this season down the trash. I don't think last game, solidifies everything. I know people are talking about fire Satterfield. He definitely needs to improve. I don't think it's time to do that quite yet. I think there's a lot of things moving that isn't really his fault. Obviously, the defense didn't look good. Nobody's talking about firing Tony White. I'm not saying Marcus Satterfield has been on the same level as Tony White, but you get where I'm going. So yeah, going into this Ohio State game, I think we're just going to do it quick. Obviously, Nebraska's a 25.5-point underdog. We're going to give our predictions, but also want to give three quick reasons why Nebraska could win this game. What needs to happen for Nebraska to win this game? So I'll go first because I didn't plan this. So Zach, I'm going to give you some time to think about your reasons. But what Nebraska needs to do to win this game, they need to sack Will Howard, because I think Will Howard, although he has been playing really well, isn't the best under pressure. I think he panics a lot. I think you saw it at the end of the Oregon game where they got to him. He, not just the last play where he ended up running and sliding and losing. I don't want to say losing the game, but that play ran the rest of the time off. But he kind of just panics a little bit, doesn't make as good throws when he doesn't have a clean pocket, when he doesn't have guys running wide open. He doesn't really make these tight window throws. But he is a really good quarterback, one of the best quarterbacks we've faced so far. So we need to get to him, need to bring him down. We need to force turnovers. You saw it a little bit in the Oregon game. Oregon, stripped Quinshon Judkins on that second drive. They had the pick on the first drive that ended up not being a pick because they didn't review it. It is possible. Obviously, at this point, Oregon's the number one team in the country. I'm not saying Nebraska can replicate what Oregon did. But yeah, so far you need to get to Will Howard, you need to force turnovers, and then lastly, the offense needs to make big plays. I don't know the official statistics on this, on explosive plays, but Nebraska, in terms of the Big Ten, definitely is probably towards the bottom in explosive plays created. Outside of UTEP, a few against Colorado, a few against. I don't even think there was any against North. I guess there was a few against Northern Illinois,
It was.
um, but overall, just not an explosive offense at all. We saw it last week. Couldn't get off the press. Couldn't get receivers running wide open downfield. Couldn't break off long runs. I think there was, you know, a few big runs in the Purdue game, but other than that, like it's just been so stagnant with 4 yard runs, 6 yard runs, and maybe you're getting a 10 yard run. Other than that, it's pretty much those 4 to 5 yard plays, and that needs to change if you want any chance to beat this Ohio State team. So you need to get to Will Howard, which I think they can. You need to force turnovers, and you need to create explosive plays to be able to even have a chance to win this game.
Yeah, I think the three things you have to do. If you go listen to Ryan Day, he gives you the three reasons why Oregon beat them. I think the game plan's there, right? The blueprint's been laid. Only one thing to do. That's just go follow it. First is you got to win the run game. That's one thing Oregon did very well. They won the run game. They won the line of scrimmage on the offensive side. That's going to beat a lot of teams. I saw a stat when you look at the Michigan State game. It was like I think it was like 48 of the last 50 winners have won the run game in that one, and so I mean it's pretty evident if you want to win games in the Big Ten, you win the run game. The second one is win the turnover battle. If you are a lesser team, which obviously we are here, nothing against it. It's just what we are. It's just the matter of fact. You got to win the turnover battle. You got to steal possessions, and then that third one is just like you said. Create explosive plays against a team like Ohio State. What they're going to try to do is get up, 14 or 21 points on you, and then they have two really, really good running backs. So they're just going to run through your face the rest of the game, and then eventually they'll beat you by 35. And then they'll go home, and then they'll come out next week and they'll try to do it again. And then they get in those big games, they're going to try to do the same thing. It's going to be a lot closer. They're going to use those running backs a lot more. But yeah, you got to create the explosive plays. You got to win the turnover battle, and you have to win the run game. And if you can do all three of those things, I think it's going to be a lot closer than some people may think in this game.
Yeah, and it's not like Ohio State has been blowing teams out, at least in the first quarter. Like the way they do it, I think they were up less than here. Let me just pull it up. I know, obviously against Oregon, they were losing at halftime. They were losing by one, and then against Iowa, it was 7-0 at halftime. Ohio State ends up scoring 21 in the third quarter, and against Michigan State, it was a bigger, but they scored 21 points in the second quarter. Started off slow. It was a 7-3 ball game at one point. So Ohio State wants to run the ball. They want to establish the run game. They want to wear you down. And then in that third quarter, that's when they want to take their big shots. They want to make those big plays. I think Nebraska can keep this game close in the first half. And I know some people are talking about the best bet of the day is Nebraska plus, I think, 14.5 in the first half. Because I think Nebraska is going to come out mad. Ohio State also might come out, wanting to prove something. They just lost to Oregon in their last game. They had the bye week, obviously, but they might be in a little bit of a look-ahead spot. I think they have Penn State next week. So they're probably overlooking this Nebraska team. I don't want to say they're probably overlooking this Nebraska team, but there's a chance. So I think everything's pointing to, Nebraska keeping it close for a little bit, and then Ohio State kind of pulling away at the end. So that's going to be what I think is going to happen. I think Nebraska is going to keep it close. I think Nebraska might have a lead at some point in this game, or at least in this first half. I think Nebraska's scripted plays, Satterfield's feeling the heat from everything that's happening. He might script up a really good, first two drives. And I think Nebraska might go up, 7-0. Maybe the defense gets a stop. Nebraska is able to go up 10-0. But I think Ohio State's talent is just far more than Nebraska's at this point. And I think Ohio State kind of pulls away at the end. So, as I said, Ohio State's a 25.5 point favorite with a over under of 48. So that's like a 37-12 type of game is what they're projecting there. I think Nebraska does cover. I think the game ends up being like the 31-14, 31-10 kind of game. My official prediction, I guess I'll go 31-14, try to stay on the optimistic side. So I think Nebraska does cover, and the under actually does hit. I think both defenses are going to play better than people think. 56 points to Indiana is not going to happen again. Or obviously we don't play Indiana again. I'm saying the effort that we showed last week, I don't think is going to happen again. You listen to Isaac Gifford in his press conference. He is super, super upset about how last week went. I think the entire team is. And as Zach said, the score doesn't really show. I mean, Nebraska was in the red zone, I think, 3 times and turned the ball over twice. So I think the score could have been closer. Nebraska was going for the win there at the end before finally pulling the starters, I think, in like the last couple minutes of the game. But yeah, so 31-14 is my official prediction. I think Nebraska looks a little bit better than people expect.
Yeah, I agree. This Nebraska team could look really good. When you go back and you look at Michigan, the last time we lost a game like this, we came out really hot. The difference is we came out really hot against an Illinois team. Was that a
Right.
terrible Illinois team? No, it wasn't terrible, but they were not, what Ohio State is. I also think, we're going to come out hot. We're going to come out looking really good. Ohio State's kind of going to get punched in the mouth, but then they're going to realize, because at the end of the day, this Ohio State team could still go win a national title. They could.
Yeah.
They could still be the best team in the country.
I think
I mean,
odds on, I think they're the favorite to win a national title still.
right. They very well could be the number 1 team in the country right now if a couple things go their way. You know what I mean? If a pass gets complete at the end in that Oregon game, they kick the field goal,
Right.
they win the game. They're the number 1 team
Totally
in the country
different
right
conversation. Yeah.
now. Right. And so as much as I would love to sit here and tell you 27-20 Nebraska is going to be my score prediction. It's not. I don't think that's impossible by any means.
Right.
But I think 35-14 is really the most likely outcome here. But I think there's a lot to take away from this game once we come out of it. It's probably going to be our toughest environment we've played in all year. It's definitely going to be the toughest team we're probably going to play all year. And so there's a lot of factors here that are just not swinging our way. And so to keep it, 21 points is obviously not great. It's not terrible either.
Right.
I don't think that's the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, no, for sure. And you mentioned it. This game really dictates the rest of the schedule, which is what we're going to do. We're going to predict the rest of the schedule. But depending on how this game works and how this game goes, the rest of these 4 games, my view on them could change drastically. So jumping into the first one, UCLA. We all assumed this was going to be easy win. It's at home. UCLA is not good. And then last week they hung, 35 on Rutgers, ended up winning the game. They almost blew it, but they ended up winning the game. They allowed Rutgers to score 32, which Nebraska only allowed 7. Can't really look at those kind of things, but I think when it's that drastic of a difference, and points allowed, I think that's kind of a tell. But yeah, this game looks a lot tougher than it did, 2 weeks ago before the Indiana game. I think it's still a win. I think UCLA is the weakest opponent we're going to play. I think the fact that we get it at home is huge, and I think Nebraska wins pretty handily in that one. And no matter what happens in this Ohio State game, unless they win, I think this UCLA game is, a get-right spot where now you've lost 2 in a row, UCLA beat them, now you're back on track. So I think Nebraska beats UCLA
Yeah, I agree. I think UCLA is a better football team than we thought, but I still don't think they're a good football team. I think Rutgers is a much worse team than we thought. I think is what is more of the story. I don't think UCLA beating Rutgers shows as much about UCLA as it does about the lack of talent that we find out now that Rutgers has.
Mm,
But yeah, it's first time coming home in a while. It's been
yeah.
a while since we played in front of the crowd. The crowd's gonna be ready to come out and support. I would like to think, and so I think this is a big win here. I think this kind of rights the fans because think about it. We're 5-3.
Assume
This
that's
win,
assuming we lose.
right?
Go ahead.
Assuming we lose this, this UCLA win would make us bowl eligible. It's a big turning point, and obviously the Matt Rule era, just in the Husker era in general, and then obviously looking forward into a huge game out in Pasadena. I think right
Right.
with USC.
Yeah, and something about this USC game that I think is really important is Nebraska gets a bye week in between UCLA and USC. So the travel it has been a huge part of this, or a huge talking point this year. When teams travel a long ways, usually they don't fare too well. Penn State traveled all the way to USC, almost lost that game. Some say should have lost that game. You get a lot of it, like Michigan traveling to Washington, lose that game. So I think the travel is a big thing. Nebraska gets a bye week. Maybe you go over there a little bit earlier. I know you still have like classes for guys. I know a lot of the guys probably have like online classes that they can do, but I think you get over there a little bit earlier, kind of accommodate to the new time zone, kind of get your sleep right, kind of get your energy right, and I think that evens out that travel. And I don't know what USC does the week before. It looks like this week they have Washington. Oh, they also have a bye week. So I was gonna say maybe they have to travel a lot more, and maybe that helps actually Nebraska. But looks like they also have a bye week. So Nebraska versus USC is going to be both teams off a bye week. Obviously, going into this year, Nebraska. I had Nebraska losing to USC. This USC team is now 3-4 with three straight losses coming against Minnesota. Help me out. Minnesota. They lost to Maryland last week, and then obviously they lost to Penn State as well. They were losing to Wisconsin for a while before they figured it out against them. So I think this USC team is very vulnerable. I think this is between them and UCLA the worst defense we're going to play the rest of the way. I think the defense has obviously improved. It can't get much worse than what it was last year. Um, but I think they're not as big as the defenses we played between Rutgers, Indiana, and now Ohio State. They're not as disciplined. They don't stop the run. Obviously, Michigan ran all over them, and you see what Michigan's doing now against teams like Illinois, where they only put up 7 points. So yeah, I think this is going to be a really close game. I think Nebraska pulls it out. I think this is a spot along with UCLA, where you can kind of figure out that run game. And the run game's been awful for Nebraska. And I think this is a spot where you can get Dowdle going. You can get Gabe Irvin going. If Ramir Johnson is healthy by then, you can get him going. You can get Emmett Johnson going. I think you can get the run game going, help out Dylan Raiola, open those things up downfield. And I think the defense has gotten right already. So I think Nebraska also beats USC.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think the travel is that crazy here. It really is. I mean, it's realistically no different than a Florida team going to Texas. It's really about the same distance travel wise. Yeah, you travel.
The time zone is what gets you, I think, because with
Yeah,
you're going from Eastern to, like you said, Florida to Texas. You're going from Eastern to Central, which is only a 1 hour difference. With Nebraska, you're
but
going
it'd be different if it
Central
was like an 11 o'clock game,
Pacific.
right? My thought is that it's gonna be.
It might be a night game.
Uh, it might be, which would not be great. It'd be a little late for us. But say it's like a 2:30 game. I mean, that's fine.
I mean,
It's not going to hurt
that's like a
at all.
normal noon kick for Central Time.
Correct. Yeah, I think it's the other way, isn't it?
Well, if it's 2:30 Central Time, oh yeah, it would be 4:30 there. So yeah,
Correct. Yeah.
it would be like a normal afternoon slate. game.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And so I get the time zone, but like the actual like flight time or anything, like I don't think it's that much to look into going from Nebraska to USC. When you start talking about like Rutgers going out
Penn
there,
State.
Penn State going out there, or even like Oregon coming out, Washington coming out, that gets a little crazy. Um, but when you get to Nebraska, I mean, we're right by Colorado, and no one would blink an eye at them going out there.
Right.
When they were in the Pac-12. So
Yeah.
it's not that crazy to me. Um, it really depends on what USC do you get. Do you
Yeah.
get the USC that beat Michigan, or did they beat Michigan?
No. No,
They
Michigan.
lost to Michigan. Do you get the USC that almost beat Penn State, or do you get the USC that lost to Minnesota?
Right.
Which USC do you get here? I think if you get the USC that almost beat Penn State, I think it's a really close game. I think Penn State kind of played bad in that game. That's what really kept it close. I think if you get a bad USC here, don't be surprised if Nebraska comes out and wins this by 14 points. I think you can establish the run here, but I do agree that the run game hasn't been where it needs to be. I've said this a couple times. The last guy that for Nebraska to rush for 100 yards was Java Purdy against Wisconsin last year, and that just when you have four backs that can realistically be some of the best backs in the conference, then you should have someone going for 100 yards, especially when you have UTEP and UNI on your schedule. And so
Right.
I get where at that point we're running a kind of a room that kind of split them all up, but still it's got to be better than that.
Yeah. I'm excited to see what happens tonight. USC is playing Rutgers. I think it's at Rutgers, or I don't know. USC is playing Rutgers, and I'm excited to see how that looks for USC in particular. See if
Yeah,
they can stop Kyle Monangai. The next game, Wisconsin, and I think it's in Lincoln. So
it
what's
is.
tough what's tough is I don't think Nebraska goes 4-0 after Ohio State. I don't think we lose to Wisconsin, and there's no way I'm picking Nebraska to lose to Iowa. So it's like, I don't know. I don't see Nebraska going 4-0 here, so I'm going to say Nebraska loses to Wisconsin. Wisconsin has gotten their confidence back a little bit. I don't think they're the team that everyone thinks they are all of a sudden. Wisconsin has had an easy last four games, and I shouldn't say easy because Nebraska hasn't had this gauntlet of a schedule, but they lost to Alabama 42-10. They lost to USC 38-21, but then they play Purdue, beat them 52-6. Play Rutgers, beat them 42-7. Beat Northwestern, beat them 23-3. So, yes, they're blowing these teams out. We figured out that all these teams are not good. Purdue's the worst team in the Big Ten. Rutgers is right down there with them now. Northwestern is also right down there with them. We're going to see a lot with Wisconsin Penn State, which is really a good game tomorrow night as well. So I'm going to say Nebraska loses that game, even though I think Nebraska is the better team. I just think Nebraska is not the team that you can just assume is going to win at this point.
Yeah. I don't know. I agree that Nebraska doesn't go 4-0, but I don't know which game they'll lose.
Right.
And so I am going to pick them to win against Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin has a lot of hype built up around them that is just not necessary. 6.5 point dogs to Penn State. I don't care if you're in Camp Randall. You're not that good. Like you're not. I think one of your best players was Ches Malusi, and he, I guess, medically retired. I think he really just quit after 4 games so he could redshirt and take his talents elsewhere. When you hear Braylon Allen talk about it, it was not like, oh yeah, Ches loves Wisconsin. He just needed to medically retire. It was yeah. I mean, he doesn't like it there. He things should have been handled a little differently. Braylon said, "I'm going to be a Badger until I die," but he said there's some things that go on there that I don't agree with.
Yeah.
So let's be real. Like Ches is not medically retiring. He's going to play for someone else next year, and then he's going to enter the draft after that. Um, I think you win here though. I think at home, I think you got to snap the streak against Wisconsin. This is someone that's just had our number for so long. Um, this goes up there with it doesn't mean a whole lot, but it's so important. It's like the Colorado game, right? If we lost the Colorado game, it really wouldn't have been the end of the world. But in the moment, it would have
Would have
felt like
felt like it. Yeah.
right. And when we won that, we didn't win the national title, but in the moment, from someone who was there, let me tell you, it sure felt like we did.
Yeah.
This Wisconsin game looks a lot like that. I think we win it. I don't think their quarterback is as good as people think he is. I think they are moving back to the run game, which has definitely helped them make them a better team. But I think our D line is better than their O line, and I think at the end of the day, that's just what it's going to come down to.
Yeah, 100%. And then getting to Iowa, I think Nebraska beats Iowa. It's actually a 6:30 kick, which is different. It's still on that Black Friday, but it's a later kick, which is interesting. And I think it's in Iowa as well. I think Nebraska wins this game. I don't think Iowa's good at all. Their offense, yes, statistically it's a little bit better. They just lost to Michigan State, who hasn't been good. I actually think Michigan State hasn't been that bad this year, but their defense gave up 32 points to a quarterback that's thrown more or very close to the same amount of interceptions as he has touchdowns. So not really worried about Iowa. I shouldn't say not really worried because Nebraska could very well lose that game. I think Iowa's actually probably going to be favored in that game, depending on what happens the rest of the year. But yeah, I think Nebraska wins that game, and I think Nebraska, that would put them at 8-4 for me. Getting a pretty good bowl probably because Nebraska fans travel well, and I think they're going to look into that kind of thing. So maybe going to Nashville or something to play an SEC team in their bowl game. But yeah, I think Nebraska kind of dominates that game. I don't see anything in Iowa that I would take over Nebraska's players, except for Caleb Johnson's a really good player, but Michigan State kind of bottled him up as well. So yeah, I think Nebraska beats Iowa as well too.
Yeah, like you said, Iowa's best thing here is Caleb Johnson. Um, the Iowa team had 130 rushing yards, which seems like that's a pretty good day. They had an 80-yard touchdown in the fourth quarter. Take that away, it's 50 rushing yards right there.
Yeah.
Obviously, they can't throw the ball. They never have been able to. I don't think their O line's that great. Their defense is stout. It's not as good as it has been in the past. They still probably have the best linebacker. Middle linebacker, probably in the Big Ten. That he's probably one of the best in the country. But outside of him, I mean, their D backs aren't as good as they have been in the past. I think it's close, but I do think we come away with this one as well.
Yeah. So Zach,
So I still think, see,
right.
that's the hard, because
It's
I
tough.
still think we are 8-4, but
Right.
I just don't know where we drop it, and I don't see us. I think the most likely one to drop is honestly USC.
I think it's USC as well. I mean, it's a road environment. They're a talented team. I know they're not showing it all the time. They look undisciplined. The coaching's not great. The decisions are weird. But we know they're talented, at least on offense, and their defense is also better than it has been. Um, I just don't know how good that really is, and I think right now I feel pretty comfortable about that win. Maybe after watching tomorrow, if our corners get torched again, I might feel a little bit different because USC can move the ball through the air. Um, but as of right now, I think Nebraska
Well,
wins that
we'll
game.
take my prediction as 8.5 and 3.5
Yeah, there you go.
is the that's my record prediction.
Yeah, if I were to set the line right now, it'd be 8.5, and that's pretty perfect, honestly. I don't. That's
Yeah, I just don't know how you can walk away being a Husker fan. 8 wins. year two of Matt Rule.
Oh yeah,
Um, Knowing that Dylan's only a freshman and Ja'Cory's only a freshman and Dante's only a sophomore. So many young players
yeah,
out there. 8 wins and moving forward. I think that's wonderful.
yeah, for sure. So quickly, we're gonna do our bet the mortgage picks. Usually we do this on a separate episode, but obviously we're recording this on Friday, so not a lot of time. Um, so I'll just tell you mine real fast. Let me pull them up. I know I have Penn State to cover, and I think their line is still at 6.5 over Wisconsin. I mean, we talked about it a little bit. Penn State's the better team. Wisconsin's still not that good. Let me just make sure it's still. Yeah, 6.5. Penn State minus 6.5 is my first one. And then I had Maryland to cover against Minnesota. Right now, Maryland is a 5.5 point underdog, so Maryland plus 5.5. Don't think Minnesota's that good. I think Maryland has a really good offense, terrible defense, and they're going to make some things happen. They could even win that game, but 5.5. Minnesota doesn't really play in games that finish with a 3 point total. And my last game, what was my last game? Zach, do you remember my last game? Was
Um, I don't.
Oh, it was Illinois. Illinois plus 21.5. I think Oregon is really good. I don't think they have the ability to just blow teams out. They blew out Purdue last week. Illinois is a legit top 20 team in the country. Illinois also doesn't really allow teams to blow them out. I think Penn State, although they might not be as explosive as Oregon, is on that same kind of level as Oregon, and they only won by 14, and I think Illinois had a chance to make that game even closer. So I think Illinois covers in this one. I don't think Illinois wins. I think Illinois probably loses by, the same amount. I wouldn't be surprised if it was another 27 or a 21-7 type game. I think Luke Altmaier is really good, and I think that defense is really sound, and I like what Brett Bielema is doing over there. So I think Oregon kind of, I don't want to say overlooks them, but just doesn't look dominant in this one, and I think Illinois easily covers.
My first one is BYU money line. They play UCF. I think it is at UCF. I
Mhm.
don't think this is much of a change here that it is at UCF. Colorado went into UCF and beat them pretty bad. Uh, I think BYU is a much better team than Colorado. I know you can't look at it like that, but I think BYU is a much better team than UCF. To be a dog here is insane. If it was BYU minus 10, I'm probably taking it. So for money line as a dog, I mean that's free money. Um, K State minus 10 is my next one. I'm not sure where this one is, um, but regardless, if it's at K State, it's obviously home field advantage for K State. If it's at KU, it's either at Arrowhead or it's at the soccer complex, which at the end of the day, when you just put it somewhere in Kansas, it's a neutral site game.
Right.
And it's going to feel that way. There's going to be equal amount of fans for both there. And so I think K State's a much better team. KU's biggest win is against someone that's ranked in the worst 25 teams in college football right now in Houston. They just came out with Big 12 power rankings. They have Houston at the bottom and KU right above them at the second to last. And so all you did was beat the guy that everyone else could beat. So I don't think that's that big of an accomplishment. Other than that BYU loss, K State looks really good. Don't be surprised if K State comes away with the Big 12 title this year and finds a way to sneak into the playoff as well with that. My last one, pulling it up here, is Boise minus 3.5 versus UNLV. Now, UNLV is a good football team. Boise State, though, their only game they've really been tested in, they played really, really good, right?
Right.
And so when you look at teams in conferences like the Mountain West, you always have to take into consideration that, well, this team, hasn't played anyone because they're in the Mountain West. Well, in Boise's case, they have, and they looked really, really good against Oregon. Um, I can't remember where that was at, if that was at Boise or at Oregon. I think it was at Boise. Regardless, though, you have Ashton Genty back there, which is by far the best running back in the country. Might be the best player in the country right now, offensively. Um, and so I just don't see UNLV, although they are a good team, stopping this Boise State offense. And Boise State also, doesn't have a terrible defense either. And so it's tonight at 9:30, and so I'm excited to see this one. I think Boise State takes it by like 10 here. Just continues to run the ball, kind of control the whole game.
Yeah, for sure. So that's going to do it for us. We're going to be back next week with our original, or not original, but normal scheduling. So preview, prediction, bet the mortgage on a separate episode. But we just wanted to get this out for you as we've been pretty busy and just wanted to get something pretty short. But yeah, we'll see you guys next week. Zach, you got anything else?
Nope.
All right, go Big Red.